So, welcome everybody to this month's meeting of the great novels of the 22nd century. Tonight we are doing Joe Haldeman's The Forever War, which is uh, deservedly considered a classic of the genre. And we have Joe with us tonight, so we can find out all that needs to be known about what went into this one. And welcome, Joe.
Thank you.
And let me ask first, are you surprised that this thing has the legs that it's had? Because it's just continually in print.
I am surprised. Every writer thinks every one of his books is immortal or hoax. Uh, I'm content to have it be as immortal as I and perhaps my next generation of relatives. Other than that, it's all abstraction. But yeah, I am surprised. I wrote it as a series of novelettes, which I was going to paste together into a novel if I found a publisher for it, but it was rejected by 19 publishers before St. Martin's Press took it. And all of them had some version of, well, this is well written, but nobody wants a novel that's transparently about Vietnam. And I said, well, I wrote it about Vietnam, so I guess there's no way around that, is there? But then the one editor, Tom Dunn at St. Martin's Press, wanted a science fiction novel about Vietnam, and it just dropped into his lap. It was good luck for all of us.
Mm, okay. Um, when I originally read it, back in, gosh, in the Pleistocene, um, yeah, I saw that it was about Vietnam, but that quickly faded into the background because the whole notion of an endless war based in time dilation took over from that. I mean, that would be too horrific to consider Vietnam subject to the same thing. But the notion of the war outliving every reason for it to be going on by passing through time like that really captured my imagination. Um, it's like, everybody jokes about that. Why are we here fighting? Well, the reasons they sent us here have already changed, so blah. But this was like, okay, let me really make the point.
Yeah.
It's a stupid thing to do, and physics is on my side in this argument. Um, I would
I'll
say,
say though, like I just read it for the first time these last few days,
mm,
and it did not feel dated or
Oh, but
specific to Vietnam's. I mean,
Good.
I could see how that's the inspiration, but as a nation that triggers wars in other places just to crank up our economy, you specifically say that sometimes, and I was like, yeah, this is where we're at.
yeah.
Um, so I found it to be really timeless, even with the dates kind of being now and then.
But
yeah, 1997 was a little bit close to.
yeah.
Yeah.
We none of us thought the space program was going to tank the way it did back then.
Yeah. Uh,
But
Well, and if I'm remembering when the dates right, the you the big novella in the middle that I didn't read the first time because it wasn't in the original version of the book uh, is basically happens right now.
Mhm.
The
yeah.
date is 2024, so it's close enough for government work.
Yeah. Well, what can I say? It's just that little time machine that we all have. You know, we
so it's taken as kind of a given that you wrote this, or that it is a response to Heinlein's Starship Troopers, which, as time passed, there have been several novels that get that label attached to them that, oh, they're just responding to Starship Troopers. But I don't remember ever hearing you talk about that as to whether or not that was even an issue at the time.
oh, I have responded to that a few times. That does has nothing to do with Starship Troopers. I
It did.
hadn't read, I read Starship Troopers before the Forever War came out, but I hadn't read it while I was writing the Forever War. And yeah, it's I've met Heinlein a few times and respect him, but basically, you know, he didn't know very much about actual warfare, combat. He had a good, you know, uh, conventional military education from Annapolis, but the difference between Annapolis and being a draftee fighting on the ground in the jungle is just night and day. I mean, I knew a lot more about warfare the second day I was in Vietnam than he knew uh, years later, years after he got out of the academy.
Okay.
Liked it though.
He did like he liked my book very much. I was gratified by his response.
It's interesting talking about influence. John Scalzi's introduction to the ebook version that I bought so I could have the big novella in the middle that I didn't have before. Talks about how everyone told him he was responding to the Forever War when he wrote Old Man's War, and he had not read it either.
Right.
That's kind of amusing.
Yeah. Well, there you go.
So it's just it's an obvious template to use for this kind of fiction. But what did you start with? Did you start with the idea of the time dilation? Did you just want to start talking about ground pounders?
In fact, I wrote a short story,
Timepiece.
Timepiece it was called, and it was strictly about the relativistic idea of a soldier living for thousands of years. And basically, I thought, well, I'd expand that into a novel. And I started out with the Hero, which was a novelette in Analog magazine, and went on from there and just actually wrote 3 more novellas. I guess were they all in Analog there?
Yeah, all
Yeah.
but one.
All but one.
One was in Fantastic.
Right. Yeah, one was in Fantastic, Ted White's magazine.
In Amazing, actually, because
Amazing.
I was reading Amazing at that time, but I must have missed that issue because I do not remember reading that section at all. And I looked at I found a copy on the internet to look at. I said, I don't recognize that cover. I don't remember any of the stories. So I wonder if somehow my newsstand missed that episode that month or that copy that month or what.
I had one magazine issue where the whole boxcar load of magazines was put on the wrong railing up in Toronto or someplace. And so nobody got the regular magazine. Maybe that was it.
That was your first story.
Oh, that was
Out of Phase.
Out of Phase.
And the Galaxy magazine was stuck in a boxcar.
Yeah, poor thing.
I actually read the novel first in Analog. I think the third part, or maybe it's the fourth. No. Yeah, one of the later episodes was in like the fourth issue of Analog I ever bought in 1974. So then I had to go back to my local library, which in those days, libraries used to actually have back issues of magazines that you could borrow.
Yeah.
And they had back issues of Analog, so I borrowed the ones with Hero and whatever other ones that were out there.
Oh.
Wow. Boy, it's
how I read it
science
first.
fiction to me. Yeah.
But
Okay, did you consider that what you were writing was a departure from the standard run-of-the-mill military SF? They didn't even have a label for it then. It wasn't military SF, it was just science fiction. We had Gordy Dixon and Paul Anderson doing some stuff, and I seem to recall, I wasn't a sophisticated enough reader when I was a kid, but I did sense this is different. This is, I would say, grittier, but that's a bit wrong. I think it was just a little bit, perhaps a little more cynical than what everybody else was doing. which later, when I found out what your background was, I thought, well, that makes sense. But I wouldn't. Would you care to talk a little bit about that? What you were
Well,
trying to do in terms of experience and genre?
well, you know how science fiction professionals and fandom sort of interbreed and mix together. Well, when those stories started coming out in the magazines, I already knew Gordy Dixon and Robert Heinlein and Harry Harrison and that whole gang of sort of masculine, more or less war-oriented science fiction writers. And among them, I was the only one who had actually been a foot soldier. And this is my little claim to fame. I mean, I actually had bullet wounds from combat, and I had actually shot at people who shot back at me and that sort of thing. And so all these guys would call me and say, what does it really sound like when a hand grenade goes off? It's fucking loud, actually. But yeah, so it was kind of an interesting social thing. I don't know how science fiction is nowadays. I back in the 70s, 60s and 70s, when this was happening to me, we were a kind of a hardy band of heroes. That is, science fiction was juvenile and second class. It was third class, and we respected each other almost because nobody else respected us. And so this this hardy gang of heroes, I was the only one who was a contemporary war veteran. And so they all kind of called me up for advice and this and that. And it was fun. It was an interesting position to be in. The social background is that almost everybody who had a college education or any education was able to sidestep service in Vietnam. If you didn't want to be a soldier, you wouldn't be one. And I was socially unaware. I was just, kind of going, I thought I was going to be an astronaut. And I thought, well, fine, that'll protect me from getting drafted. Well, I was wrong, totally wrong about that, because I got snatched up and said, well, you want to be an astronaut, you can be an astronaut in uniform. I said, but wait, that's not in the fine print anywhere. And actually, by the time I got out of Vietnam, I was not in physical condition to be an astronaut or any kind of a naut. So, it's just, it's not a tragedy or anything like that. It's just an interesting footnote to what was always going to be a literary career rather than a military one.
Did you purposely have the soldiers in this novel be recruited from the higher education system as kind of a reaction to that?
Yes.
Well, it was actually, I was thinking, well, they're all scientists, basically, or at least trained as scientists and technicians. So they'd all have at least a bachelor's degree level of education.
So, but and of course, this happens to all kinds of best laid plans in the military, but it didn't seem like their scientific background really made much of a difference.
No,
But
no, that's very military. I think that's adequately true.
Speaking of being, a science fiction fan and writer and being looked down on, you went to the University of Iowa's famous writers workshop. Did they react negatively to any desire to write science fiction?
Oh boy, were they against it. Well, not the other teachers. I mean, the other guys on my social level were saying, man, that guy's making, they make $100 for a short story. Jesus fucking Christ, how can I get into this? And they're all going, wow, he's making real money. And this is only real money from the viewpoint of a starving graduate student, but that's still very real if you're a starving graduate student. And so oh hell, we'd have big parties and have all the gang over, and we'd make a whole pot of chili. We'd buy real meat for it and the whole thing like that. So it was an interesting sort of living in two worlds at once. The other graduate students at Iowa were sort of bemused by the strange world I inhabited, because none of them had ever written anything to be paid for by the word. And that's all I ever did. What, you got $180 for that? Holy shit, $180. That's 2 weeks rent. That's 2 months rent. And I'm going, yep. Get your spray guns oiled up, boys. You could make a big fortune too.
But the workshop itself.
The workshop itself was very alien to the idea. I got in before they realized I was a science fiction writer. I had heard about the Iowa Writers Workshop when I was down in San Miguel de Allende in Mexico. We were just traveling around Mexico the year after I got back from Vietnam, and just, having a good time. And San Miguel de Allende happened to be a sort of a retreat for writers and artists. And everybody there is saying, how can you can't make money writing, because nobody did. I mean, there were only about a half a dozen actual markets for fiction. And there were two that paid well, Playboy and Esquire, I guess. And the others were all chump change, which is okay. You don't write for money. But there was one guy there in San Miguel de Allende who had a wallet absolutely fat, like 3 inches thick, with large denomination Mexican bills. He wrote pornography and got paid by the page. And he would, what did they call them? 40 pagers or whatever.
Forget.
But he'd write these things. It would take him a weekend, like 3 or 4 days at most, to write one of these little novels. And the the great editorial requirement was, if you open it up at random, there's got to be a 4-letter word on one page or the other. And so as you're typing, like, say, oh fuck, I forgot my fuck, and you just put it in there. And this was the richest writer I'd ever met. I mean, in actual real terms, he could buy cases of booze for everybody, and chickens for everybody, and turkeys and everything. Well, not turkeys in Mexico, but that sort of thing. And it was a weird kind of almost science fictional lesson there, because this guy came out of nowhere, made of money, and passed on. And I'm going, holy cow. At the same time, the only science fiction writer in town that we knew was Mac Reynolds.
Okay.
And so Mac and Jeanette, and their pals, they ran an open house in San Miguel de Allende. And it was just an ocean of booze. And I mean, it's hard to exaggerate the amount of alcohol that this house floated on, because Mac was a world-class alcoholic, and his wife was supportive of that. And they ran a sort of a fantasy of booze. And today, if it happened now, it'd all be drugs, but drugs were not that interesting in those days. So we just had a wonderful, like a frat party going all the time. Like there would be.
We were only there for 3 days.
I know. Well, but the party was going on before and after
Yeah.
we were there.
But the story is how you got to the Iowa Writers Workshop.
Oh, yeah. I got to the Iowa Writers Workshop because somebody brought it up at a party in San Miguel de Allende. And they said, you've got an education and you're going to graduate school. Why don't you go all the way and apply to the Iowa Writers Workshop. And I said, Iowa? That's a big square state out there. I mean, I kind of knew where it was, but that's all. And they said, sure, it's just a letter, write them and find out. And so I wrote them. And one guy, Vance Bergeli, a wonderful writer, he had read some science fiction. And he didn't recognize my name, but he read the stories that I sent in. And I thought, yeah, this is great. Let's bring this guy in and, shake up the department a little bit. And it worked perfectly because, I enjoyed it a lot anyhow. And it gave me a place to sit for a couple of years and just write.
Mm.
And that's totally invaluable for a young writer because I was sort of legitimate and I was making enough money to live on. And I had a wife who worked, very well and actually went out and get some money for me every now and then. Yeah.
As graduate students, we made more money. We both had graduate assistantships, and he had money coming in from writing. So we fed everybody for a while.
Yeah. It's a strange feeling to be, we were wealthy by the standards of the people we lived with, and what else means anything? I mean, so,
It was good.
yeah, it was good.
But the Forever War was his master's thesis.
Yeah.
Thesis.
Ah, okay.
The first science fiction novel ever to be a master's thesis, I
Yeah.
think.
Well, certainly the first one in Iowa.
And the head of the department disapproved very much.
Oh,
And
yeah.
when Joe got a
Mhm.
big advance on the next novel, he called him in and asked him how he'd done it.
Yeah.
Really disapproved.
Yeah. Oh, my.
Oh, wow. Yeah, we got a little of that at Clarion because I went to Clarion in '88. He was still at MSU
Oh, yeah.
yeah.
State, and the head of the English department descended upon us in the last week, and he tried to make nice with everybody, but a very peculiar social situation had occurred, and all of us who were in the workshop, he tried to mix his students in with us.
Uh-oh.
At the end of the party, we were all of us gathered in one room by ourselves, and his students were elsewhere. Damon Knight was just chuckling like crazy. You know how Damon could just do that dry.
Oh,
He says happens every year. The guy's trying to get mileage off of hosting Clarion, and he tries to do this, and it never ever works. And then the last night, he showed up at our party, and a friend of mine was there and sat down, and the guy who just ran Clarion down like this is a joke. This is crap, lit crit, and unfortunately for him, my friend knew something about the statistics of Clarion and started telling him how many writers and editors and publishers had come out of Clarion that
Yeah.
were making a living at it and were successful. And how's your department doing, sir? He didn't like that. But
By
yeah,
the time I went to Clarion in '97, which was also at MSU, that was over. And our director was Lister Matheson, who was in the English department. So, that was a little more legitimacy, I guess, because we had the director was a professor at MSU.
yeah.
I have a question, though. Did the Iowa guy dislike that the training was in Missouri rather than Iowa in your thesis?
I wondered.
Maybe that was part of it, but Iowa's north of Missouri.
Yeah.
Colder.
Well, it could be. I don't know. Well, actually, he was a New Englander himself, and I don't think he liked Missouri any more or less than Iowa.
It ain't civilization to a New Englander.
Oh, yeah.
The horrors of the tenure system right there.
Oh, yeah. And then I wound up in New England for the rest of my professional life at MIT.
So Iowa ran for 2 years. I mean, I'm not that familiar with other workshop structures. So what, you became a writer in residence?
It was a 2-year program.
Okay. Oh, okay.
And basically, I guess most of the people wound up publishing a book of short stories rather than a novel. But sometimes a novel, sometimes a play or a TV show or something. Basically, you had to, your thesis for your MFA was a publication of some kind.
No, it didn't have to be published.
Well, no, it didn't have to be published, but it had to be a publishable thing.
Okay.
Oh, I got to say, I went to give the English department a copy of my MFA thesis, and I didn't have it all typed up and squared off and everything like that. And I asked him, damn it, and it cost me a couple $100 to have this typed up. And the lady there, who was sort of super secretary, said, "You've got a hardbound book there that was actually commercially published?" And he said, "Yeah." She said, "Put it in a fucking box and we'll take it that way." So I did. And the book actually got stolen because the Forever War hardback was worth as much as $1,000 at various times if it had, a mint.
They found it. They found it. It was just misfiled.
Yeah, as Kay says, it disappeared and reappeared.
Yeah, we don't want this to be available. Yeah. So let me ask you, because Clarion lasts 6 weeks, and my experience was that at the end of it, I was writing differently than at the beginning. What do you think you got out of that other than just time to write? Did you get anything valued from the actual workshop itself?
Yeah, I learned a lot. I did. Although it's difficult to parse it and come up with what I wouldn't have learned by myself. In fact, by the time I got into taking actual classes at the workshop, I guess I had written 3 books. And I'd also written a couple of throwaway adventure novels. And so I had a lot of wordage, and I had absolute confidence in being able to write a book or a trilogy for that matter. And that was one thing I had over most of the people there. I knew, given me a stack of paper, I will produce a book. May not be any good, but I didn't say it was going to be good. I just said it'd be a book. In fact, I've never written a bad book. I've written some books would you have to really stretch your criteria to make them sound good. But
Joe,
I don't know. It's always the best I could do under the circumstances. You've got 3 months to finish a novel, and then do another one 3 months later. That's when I was writing these commercial Attar the Merman thrillers. You can't worry about every word. You kind of worry about getting to the bottom of this stack of paper and getting another stack of paper.
I love those books.
I love them too. They were pretty good books for what they were.
Attar.
Yeah.
Attar.
But then what can you say? Every book that you think is good for what it is.
Good way to look at it.
I was looking at your bibliography today, and I saw those books, and I thought, I never knew anything about those.
Yeah, most people haven't.
We can't figure out how to get the rights back.
Yeah.
The guy has died. The company is gone. And we'd love to get the rights back and put them up as ebooks or something. They're fun. They're just 2 of them.
Yeah.
And 2 Star Trek novels.
Yeah, I gave my wife one of your Star Trek novels once because she doesn't read science fiction, but she loves Star Trek.
Oh, well, there you go.
So
I hope she liked it.
to be honest, I think her reaction was, "I really like watching on TV better."
Yeah.
She reads a lot of novels, but they're like mystery novels and that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Good stuff, but science fiction isn't really her thing. But for some reason, Star Trek on TV works great. But
yeah, I would say Star Trek on TV is not science fiction.
no.
It's pretty good TV drama.
Mm-hmm.
But I had fun writing it. I mean, I had to learn a whole bunch of new techniques to write Star Trek, and I was glad to learn them.
Yeah, just out of curiosity, were there any professors at Iowa you thought particularly helpful or influential, or were you working against them most of the time?
Oh no, no, I didn't much. I don't have the personality to work against people.
Or I
And
meant or subverting what they're trying to teach just because you're on a different page. But anyway, anyone that worked well for you.
yeah, Vance Bergeli especially. Vance was a big help, and he was already a very well-known mainstream author, and he was out of patience with most of the workshop because he didn't think they were very serious in terms of being actual writers. They were serious about being workshop graduates and getting their, Iowa thing, but they weren't like me and him, which was, let's write a book that people won't be able to put down. Write a book that will entertain somebody so much he wants to pass it on to the next person. That's what it's about, to me, but that's my generation as a science fiction writer too. Yeah, those were the days, by God.
And the guy who taught you about screenwriting,
Oh yeah,
Fox.
yeah. William Price Fox was also a professor at Iowa, and he was a totally commercial, seat of the pants Hollywood writer, and he could sit down with a case of beer and just start typing and wind up with a screenplay. And say, here you go. Next time, I'll come back in a week and do another one. And he was a great companion there too.
Teacher.
He was a teacher. He was my professor for screenwriting. Oh, we had a wonderful time. We had these once a week. We'd sit in a classroom for 3 hours and talk about everything, and then we'd come back and do, pass around manuscript for a workshop situation. And one time, he said, as an experiment, we took a portable camera. Now, this was an odd thing back in the 70s. We had a little portable camera that they used for news broadcasting and, sound and such. And so we were going to write on set a little action scene in a bar in Iowa City. And this is a country bar. It's just a place where we all knew and we all showed up. And so we got there about 10 in the morning, and there were already a couple of drunks at the bar. And so we started going and setting up the camera and all the lights and everything. And one of the drunks comes over and says, "Hey, you guys want a fight scene?" and our director said, "Yeah, sure, go ahead." And so he jumps on the other guy, and they're crawling on the ground, punching each other out. We bring the camera over, and we're doing close-ups and long shots and follows and stuff like that. And we were just laughing, and we had a great time, and they actually got pretty good scenes out of it. But that was wonderful. Yeah.
I always wanted to be in the movies.
Yeah, right. Well, there was a sort of a wonderful camaraderie in Iowa, and I'm sure there still is. It's a sense of being alone with a bunch of your comrades for 2 years. You're going to write like hell, and after 2 years, you get a piece of paper, but you're not there for the piece of paper. You're there for the 2 years, and it was a great experience.
So getting back to the Forever War, I just remembered something that I wanted to bring up that I noticed about one of the things, because books need thematic anchors, whether we want them to be there or not. And often they happen accidentally. So let me put this one out there. One of the themes in the Forever War is the fruitlessness of hanging on to something as if it's never going to change. And they're out there in the galaxy fighting to keep their own, human identity is going to be this. We're going to fight the bad guys, and we're going to hang on to our humanity. And of course, as the book proceeds, you see it just drifting away. It's just changing constantly, and they come back home and something else is different. And by the end of the book, we don't fit in here at all. And alongside that, you laid in the romance between Mandela and Mary Gay, which, in point of fact, never changes through the entire thing. And so, what was supposed to be the anchor was not. But here's the thing that was really important: was that consciously done, or is that one of those serendipitous things that just happened? Because I thought it was just touching as hell, especially as a comparative narrative thread.
Well, as well as I can recall, I did not plan that. I didn't plan the story that precisely. I was just typing, and I had a sort of a game plan for the novel, which changed every few months. I sold the book on the basis of sample chapters and an outline.
You'd already written a
But
good part of
pardon
it.
me, she says I'd already.
You'd already written most of it.
Yeah, right. And I don't know. I sold several books in that period, just on the basis of typing out about 20 pages of the first few chapters, and then cobbled together an outline. I knew from what everybody had told me that nobody's going to read the outline. I mean, if the outline makes a good story, they don't care about whether you stick to it, because the sales job is interesting, and the actual novel itself is interesting. But whatever process you use to get from one to the other it doesn't make any difference. You just somehow you get it. I think that's one reason it's difficult to be a writer. One reason not everybody can do it is that there is a missing mystery chapter there. Everybody does this differently. I don't know how many books I've read about writing. It's way too many, I'm sure. But I try to come up with some coherent algorithm that they all share, and I don't think there is one. I think everybody has a series of anecdotes that reflect the way their career went. And trying to sort through them all and come up with this is the way people become writers. I'm not sure you can do it.
Yeah, no, I don't either. The most useful book that I've read about it was Stephen King's On Writing, which actually has very little in it about the process of writing, but it talks about being a writer.
Yeah, living.
And I think that's more useful.
Yeah, it's quite a good book. I think as a sort of a spiritual guide as well as anything else. That is to say,
yeah,
here's a guy, I am the most successful writer in the world. Okay? Now ask me anything you want. And my answer means something, whether it applies to you or not, just from the position of authority which I have. I mean, I knew Steve back when, after his first novel came out. He and I had the same agent. And Gay and I were in Maine just camping. And it turned out we were only 10 miles from Steve's house. We didn't know that. But I was talking to my agent, who is also Steve's agent. And he said, well, why don't you just call him up? I mean, he's a plain guy. He's easy. So we called him up, and we went up and sat on his porch barefoot, drank beer, and talked about writing and this and that, the other thing. And it was a wonderful experience for many, many reasons, partly because he's just a great guy to meet and know. But it was a tremendous transformative experience for me, because here's actually one of the dozen most successful writers in the world. And he wants to say hi, we have the same agent. Why do we have a beer? Yeah, well, why not? Incidentally, what is the secret of your success? Could you tell me how to make $1 million? Oh, yeah, sure. Just keep typing, basically.
Well, Anybody else have anything to say about the Forever War?
So the one thing, and this bothers me every time I see it in a novel, is the similar idea of where by the end of the novel, the entire human race, with the exception of a few oddballs, is one individual. And that seems like just a terrible single point of failure sort of solution. So I found that actually kind of scary. And Asimov did something like that in one of the later Foundation novels.
Yeah.
And I thought that was scary too. And
He
so,
also did it in The Last Question.
yeah.
Yeah, sort of predicted the singularity is what he did.
Oh.
And yeah, that was kind of unnerving. How is this all going to resolve? And well, this is the natural end stage of evolution. If you were writing it today, would you change your mind about that?
No, in fact, I might make it even worse. We have learned a certain amount about the American experiment now that we didn't know at that time. And it's not a bright idea. There's no extended character in the Forever War, or even in any of my novels, who is quite as scary as is the leaders of the United States now. That's my appearance, my political thing. It's not really political. I'm just sort of looking around at how people are trying to cope with present day tensions. And I'm going, holy shit, I am in a science fiction novel. And it's not well written. And it's not going to be a good ending.
It's an idiot plot.
Yeah, basically, that's it. I mean, where's the editor here? How can you know?
That's a continuing thing in a lot of your books. You don't really buy into the plucky hero finding a solution that works magnificently and saves everybody. I can't think of too many other writers that consistently will give a nod toward how ultimately stupid people really are.
Yeah. Well, I am a realist. If I'm anything writer, I'm a realist, and realism doesn't have much room for romantic heroes.
Yeah, but there's still compelling reads. The newest thing of yours that I read was the Marsbound trilogy.
Oh.
And if I may, I'd like to give you a compliment because you pulled a trick off in that trilogy that I have actually gone back to the first book and read it 3 times to try to figure out how you did this, which is you have a first-person narrative and the main character is a young girl and you capture her voice quite well. You're reading it, and this is the voice of a young girl. And as she grows up, the voice changes, and it is plausibly a young woman and then a middle-aged woman. And I don't know how the hell you did that. That transformation of the voice was slick and convincing and just made me, that triggered a little envy. I
Well,
had to talk to you, sir. That was a neat trick.
I'm glad you recognize it.
Huh?
I'm glad you recognize it. The thing is, I'm not a natural writer. I have read a lot of books about writing, and I've taught writing for thousands of hours. And I'm an extremely analytical writer. So yeah, I could sit down and write a book about writing, except there's no fucking money in it. But I don't see. Okay, my academic background is not even in the humanities; it's in the physical sciences, and so I worked hard to get my basic credentials in physics and astronomy, and then I'm not good at it. I'm just not that good. But I am good at writing, and I'm pretty good at teaching too. And so things just shuffled down, and here I am I can hardly do differential equations anymore, but I can teach and I can write. And so basically, a lot of people wind up using their life to find out what they can do best. And that's what I did.
Tell them about how Marianne O'Hara in the World's Trilogy.
Yeah.
He wanted to do a female voice. Can you?
Oh, yeah.
How you started doing the female voice?
Yes, this was actually kind of almost like a made up story, but I decided I wanted to have a female protagonist for this, what turned out to be a trilogy. And I thought, okay, what if I had been born a girl? Because most novels, and certainly most trilogies, are autobiographical to some extent. I said, well, okay, what if I were a girl? And I went back to, nobody remembers their birth, but you do remember being a little boy or a little girl. I said, okay, if I were a little girl, 3, 4, 5 years old, what would be different about me? And is there something that I can remember and actually relate to? Can I make myself up again from a little boy to a teenage boy to a young adult, and no, I mean to a teenage girl, to a young adult woman, and then a professional woman? How would I be different from the male version of me that I have firsthand information about? And basically, I just wrote, I don't know, a dozen pages, some free form blah 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 about it, and sort of nooged that into a biography. Now, actually, I did most of this writing on a train ride from New York down to Florida, and just sitting in the train with a bottle of wine and and my little manual typewriter, and clackety clack clack clack, and there I went. And I'd do it again if I could. I can't drink anymore. It's a terrible failing for a writer, but there you go.
I think you can be forgiven. I really love I read that when I was young, Worlds trilogy, and the sense of displacement, right? Like first you're in space, and then okay, you're on Earth, but there's the death. And
Right.
and it was interesting for me because I'm young enough that Charlie Manson was an historical figure, really. I mean, he was still alive and in prison, but
Right.
there was no emotional resonance for me in the Manson murders. I had to look it up, right? And, right? Because eventually you wait long enough and that's the case. He's history.
Yeah.
It's like the Kennedy assassination. That was before I was born.
Yeah.
So it was interesting that you use that as the central metaphor, like especially in Worlds Apart, right? And yet it worked for me. It worked for me, even though I had to kind of analyze the central metaphor rather than sort of feel it in my gut.
Yeah.
And
That's interesting.
Charlie.
Well,
But
that's
huh?
yeah. About to sort of extend this sideways, I remember sitting in the school library at the University of Maryland when Kennedy was shot, and I was already writing. I was a fiction writer, although I hadn't had any real successes. I guess I had one story published or something.
You were an undergraduate.
I was an undergraduate.
You were taking a writing course.
But then I guess my reaction to it was, I've got to remember this. I'm going to have to write something about this. And I don't know. I had my notebook, and I wish I still had that notebook. I don't know.
You do.
Yeah, if you have any young students or people you advise, tell them never throw anything away. I wish I had all that stuff from when I was 18, 19 years old.
I'll one more anecdote and then we can get back to Forever War.
Yeah.
I met on a couple occasions the British writer and musician Mick Farren.
Mm-hmm.
And he had written a number of books for Del Rey and then some later books. And in a couple of different ones, he had put like sort of science fictional grappling with the Kennedy assassination. It was clear
Now,
that this was an idea that was important to him that he was writing at from different angles. And I asked him, okay, you're British. Why is this such a big deal to you, right? And he thought about it and he said, well, the feeling at the time was utopia's been canceled.
right.
And that was the first time I understood it, right? Like,
Yeah.
right? Because it was an historical event by the time I was around, because I was born 3 years later. So I was wondering if you had that feeling as well at the time.
Yeah, it was, it's hard to actually put ourselves back into that time. I remember the terrible sense of confusion and randomness going on. He says, what the fuck is going to happen now? Because, you know, here's Lyndon Johnson, who we all thought was a joke, and he's suddenly in charge of everything. And he's a mean guy, and he's, sort of the quintessence of evil. And here he's in charge of the country. And we were to learn that he wasn't that bad. But yeah, no, well, we were in suburban Washington at the time, and the place was bleeding cops everywhere you looked. There were policemen and soldiers, and it was like part of it. It was like a science fiction scene, in a way. And we were, God, and then tear gas everywhere, and it was a science fictional notion. Well, for years afterwards, we had wafts of tear gas all the time because the University of Maryland, where we were going to school, was politically active. And with Washington just down the street, there was always plenty of cops to make sure we were not disturbing the peace too much.
Understand.
Yeah.
So back to Forever War, I was impressed by the physics and chemistry that kind of like you had, your narrator casually mentioned, oh, liquid helium behaves this way at like 8 degrees above absolute, right? And I'm like, I know that the guy is smart. He's got an IQ over 150 and he studied physics, but like, I was wondering how you did all that research on that. But especially before the internet, when you like had to hit the library. I remember those days.
It helped if you loved the libraries. And I lived in libraries. I'd show up at the library before dawn. We had a 24-hour serials library at Maryland. And yeah, I lived there. I worked in the physics and physical science library at Maryland my last couple of years there. I was a librarian. I just pushed stacks of books around and put them back in the right place. And
but you could Dewey Decimal with the best of them, I imagine.
Yeah. Oh, I could do that in my sleep. And it helped me when I was drafted, when I wound up in this, and I was wounded in Vietnam and wound up in a hospital where they had a Red Cross unit attached to the infantry. And they were looking for college educated people. And I was not only college educated, but I had worked as a librarian. And they were setting up a library and a series of libraries in Cam Ranh Bay in Vietnam. And so they asked me, could you do this, do that? And I said, shit, I've done this before. I don't even have to look it up. And so I became sort of a combat librarian. It was a wonderful.
You have to have business cards made up that say that.
Yeah. He's a man of a certain caliber. And he'll develop a sense of humor, of course. But
I thought your sense of humor was shot off in Vietnam. The other thing that I wanted to mention about the book was that it was delightfully written. That there were these beautiful turns of phrase and stuff, which again you can attribute to the narrator being smart. But I was wondering how conscious you were with the narrative voice of like, well, I have to keep the beautiful writing, can't let it get above a certain height or it won't be convincing. Did you have any of that or those thoughts when you were writing it?
I don't recall being that analytical about it. The guy was the book is autobiographical, and the main character is pretty much who I would have been if I had been born into those circumstances, as far as I could tell. I mean, that's probably the description of most protagonists of most first-person novels. Although it's interesting to write a first-person novel about somebody who's totally unlike yourself. That's a wonderful exercise. I made my students do it, you know. Say, okay, I want your character to be a wife beater who does it even though he doesn't like it. And but he gets paid well for it. What? How could you get paid for being a wife beater? Oh, use your fucking imagination. Are you a writer or what?
I don't have the chronology in front of me, but where does that fall? Did you write 1968 before or after the Forever War?
After.
Long
After.
Wait, yeah, years and years after. Yeah.
Oh, okay, okay. Um, yeah, a little anecdote about that. My father, who's gone now, was back in the 60s, he was a gunsmith.
Oh.
And when all of the stuff started coming out of Vietnam about the M16s and their misfiring and all of that stuff, he was just incensed. He thought that was a crock. And so many, many, many years later, I finally acquired a copy of 1968 and I'm reading it. And there's that little bitty chapter you've got in there about the problems with the M16. That was one of the most succinct and clear descriptions of, okay, this is a combination of the misuse by the soldiers and government screw ups and all. So I took the book to my dad and I said, read this. And he read that and he goes, son of a bitch. And that was as far as I got with an apology. He never brought it up again. Because by then he was actually working in the military industrial industry. And it just made, okay, I get it.
Yeah. Well, that was a gratifying part to write and to read. I wasn't given an M16 because I was an engineer. They just gave me an old M14, which didn't work. And they said, that's okay, just don't point it at anybody and pull the trigger and you won't get in trouble. But they handed me an M16 once, which had scratched on the side, this machine doesn't work. And it's scratched like with a diamond and I thought, well, I'm going to take this guy's word for it. And I never even tried to fire it. But I had one, it fired once and the next round came up sideways and jammed. And I don't know. I had a lot of different weapons in Vietnam because that was the nature of my job. But, I fortunately didn't have to fire them very often.
Yeah, the one photograph that I think is in either on your Wikipedia page or it was used as oh yes, it was your author photo in 1968. I think that's an M1 carbine that you've got on your hip.
I think it's an M16, but no, an M14. Yeah, M14. So similarly good, Karen. Yeah, yeah. That's what I used for when that picture was taken. I was sitting on the helicopter pad waiting to take some stuff out back to the fire base. So you might see that there's all sorts of stuff stacked.
Yeah.
Of beer mostly. And I'm reading a paperback, if I recall. Might have been Dahlgren, oddly enough.
I think you mentioned that in some other context that you read Dahlgren when you were in country.
Yeah. And
No,
yeah,
that couldn't have been because Dahlgren wasn't published until 75.
was it that late? Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
So what was the big,
Stand on Zanzibar.
could be, yeah, Stand on Zanzibar.
That was
That was the other.
Or Dune. Dune was 1960.
Be that
Dune.
size.
It might have been Dune.
Yeah. So, are you working on anything new?
Oh, it's all new, isn't it? I mean, I'm just, let's see, right now I'm looking at all this stuff I've got all kinds of stuff I'm working on. Like,
No new novels
no
coming.
new novels. Here's one.
Hold it up. Yeah.
Oh, I guess it's a mirror image to you.
Oh,
It says, "Girl in the process of discovering the fourth law of motion." There she is. Yeah, there she is.
He's doing a lot of diary writing and essay writing and not much fiction.
No, that's right. I say, well, if somebody offers me enough money, I'll write some fiction, but actually I probably wouldn't. I don't know how much money that would be.
Now I want a book of cartoons, though.
Yeah. Well, now let's talk turkey. Let's see what we can do.
I've been thinking about putting one together because someone asked me for a page of his cartoons for a convention. And I found a lot and I didn't realize he had so many. So I really ought to go through your notebooks and put together a cartoon set.
Please do that, Gay. That would be lovely.
I have about 30, literally about 30 notebooks with at least one page. I find like this one is one. I love this notebook, and I've written one page in it. But it's such a perfect notebook. I'm waiting for the time to actually write something immortal in it, and it's just the right length for a novelette or something.
I've had notebooks like that. Oh, this is too good just for normal run-of-the-mill junk. I have to be really on top of my game to soil the pages in this notebook.
Oh, here she's got the
fancy one. Hold that up.
Oh, wow.
This, I guess, was a Christmas present. Bought at the Hogtown Renaissance Fair, 23 January 2022. But this is a good notebook because it looks real. I mean, that paper is aged and all. Yeah. And it's just kind of inconvenient to carry around. It's a bad size.
Too big.
It's a little too big. Unfortunately, some of my best notebooks are too big. And I carry a purse like all real men do. And, and my purse is not big enough for a book like this.
He collects fountain pens and likes to write in fountain pen.
Yeah, I've got a few of them right here.
Well, that's a noble hobby.
Yeah. Well, here's 5 fountain pens that are just here. I'm not even looking deep.
And this is a dining room table.
Yeah, this is not my work environment. I'm just, if you leave fountain pens everywhere on every flat surface in your house, you always have a fountain pen. That's my philosophy.
And your wife gets grouchy.
Yeah, your wife gets grouchy, but
Well, she can pick one up and leave you a dirty note.
Right.
Put your fountain pens away.
Yeah.
I should do that.
Well, thank you very much, Joe. Anybody have any last?
And Gay, thank you, Gay.
Yeah.
You're welcome. Here I am.
Here she is. She's been here all along.
I read.
I met you two at the first convention I ever went to. I met you two there.
Yeah.
It was 1982 in St. Louis.
Wow.
Archon 6, and Stephen King was the guest of honor.
That's where I met Stephen King.
Yeah.
Yes.
And I met you, and I met George Martin, and I met Robin Bailey and Walter John. It was huge, and of course, because Stephen King was there, it was a media circus.
Oh,
and
yeah.
huge attendance, and the local cable channel was there, and me and Donna were like, wow, if they're all like this could be fun. The next year, Gene Wolfe was the guest of honor, and it had shrunk back down to what a normal convention's like, and we're like, what happened?
That's such a
Which is a
missed
shame because
opportunity.
he's a fabulous writer.
Yeah.
Yes.
I'm
Yeah.
in St. Louis, and I moved to St. Louis in 1981, but I was at that time too shy to imagine the idea of going to a science fiction convention with all these writers that I immensely admired. I finally started going, and I realized that all these writers are actually just people. Yeah. But
I was at that one with Stephen King and got into a poker game with him.
Yes.
I remember you bitching about that the day
Who
after.
won?
He
Well,
kept me into pockets and pulling out
Pulling money.
$10 and $20 bills. And he had secreted about his body before he sat down.
yeah, everybody was mad at King because he had more money than everybody else. He could spend
Yeah.
them all on the game.
But we thought we could get it from him. See,
But he was a good poker
he
player.
was a good poker player. Still is, I'm sure.
That makes sense.
Yeah. Well,
We have met a lot of bad poker players in the science fiction world.
yeah, and they probably think they're good.
Yeah,
Yeah.
well, that's the ones you want to sit down with.
I don't know. I tried playing poker for a while with a bunch of buddies and get together once a month, penny ante type stuff, $20 limit. And I would take a 20 with me every time and come home with nothing and realize that it was probably good entertainment to be with my friends for a few hours for the
Yeah.
cost of $20.
Yeah.
But it would keep costing that much every time I went to play poker, as long as the limit was $20.
Well, I have the diametrically opposite experience because I've made as much as $9,000 in one night playing poker. And this tournament poker, where you pay a couple $100 to get in, and it's basically you're playing against people whose honesty is monitored by the casino that's running the tournament. And so otherwise you can't tell. I mean, there are card sharps who can produce a card literally out of nowhere. Tournament play is good because everybody's put in a certain amount of money, and you have a dealer, nobody else gets to touch the cards. And so you just sort of play, and if you play quietly and pay attention, I can make a lot of money. I mean,
With it, if he's lucky.
yeah, well, of course you need good fortune. But part of the luck is just folding when you have a bad hand. Oh boy, are you a genius? Look at that, he folded. Wow.
My first boss here, I worked for a defense company, and he was a heavy drinker and wrecked a car and decided he better stop, and or else he'd kill himself. And so he stopped drinking, and we would do flight tests out of Nevada, and he would drive up to one of the small casinos where the rules weren't quite as strict as they might be in Las Vegas.
Yeah.
And he would come home, he would pay for, the company was paying for everything anyway, but he would make a big profit every time he went because he said his method was simple. Since he didn't drink, after an hour or so, everyone else was drunk and he would just clean them out. So
Yeah.
Joe used to get up early in the morning and go down, and everybody was drunk but him.
Yeah.
And he could do well on those things.
So under normal conditions, I'd be getting up at 3 in the morning anyhow. So I get up at 3 in the morning, instead of writing, I'd play poker and make a lot more money that way.
And on that note,
I think Charles had something he wanted to ask.
Sure.
Oh, it just feels so out of context at this point.
Oh, no, go
Oh,
ahead.
that's okay.
Well, just I started reading Analog in the summer of '73.
Mm.
And so I ended up reading all the stories. I read Hero in a best of collection. And I was all of 13, 14, and 15 as everything came out. And everything seemed like the perfect, had me feeling like this is the way it is. This is the way things work. And I remember reading Worlds when I was in my 20s and feeling the same kind of thing. But as I read it now, I'm also reading for a convention where we're talking about all the books came out in 75. There are a number of stories from that time period that have a future America where everyone's overcrowded and the crime rates are high. I recently read an Elgis Budris story with that. And it was interesting how the early sections didn't come with that same elastic, oh, this is right because it's, John Clute's Year Zero. This is 1975 version. But as the story got later and more in the future, that sensation came back.
Yeah.
Two personal anecdotes. I remember reading the story where they come back and discover that most people are practicing homosexuals. I was 14 in 8th grade in this giant study hall reading this in analog at an all-boys school. And my first reaction was, no. And then it started to make sense. And it was such a sensitizing moment for me in the context I was growing up with. That was
Great.
I don't like to say fiction's transformative because I think a lot of people claim that too often, but it was this small moment that had me thinking differently about things. However, the counterposition is when everyone's pairing up. I thought my sex life would be really easy when I grew up.
Oh, well, it's fiction.
It seemed to be kind of mandatory, at least at the start, that everyone would pair up and switch partners every night.
Yeah, well, that was part of the military way of life at the time.
And I saw there was a Gene Wolfe story from roughly the same time period, Silhouette, not that well known a story, but they had a few women in a spaceship, and it was the same deal. That unfortunately the ratio wasn't great, so the women had to take turns. The women made it pretty clear that yes, they had orders to do that every night, and they didn't like it.
Right. Yeah.
And
well, Gene and I might have had a few conversations about that, actually.
Yeah.
We often talked, and Gene was one of the other writers of the generation who had a little military experience.
He was in Korea, right?
Yeah, he was in Korea. He drove a Jeep.
Gardner was in Germany, right? But not combat.
Who was?
Gardner Dozois.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, Gardner. Gardner has some great stories about Germany.
He told me a couple of them.
Yeah. Yeah, he didn't enjoy the military at all.
No. But what Charlie said about the depiction of present day Earth, I had the same feeling now that I did not have in the 70s. It did seem like a 70s version of how horrible things were going to get.
Yeah. Well, was I right? Yeah.
Things are horrible, but they're horrible in a 2020s way. It doesn't, the feel is different, even if the results might end up as bad,
Sure.
I guess is the way I'd put it.
Yeah.
The ration war and all the stuff dealing with lowering accessibility feels like still something that could be in our future.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Alas. Fritza, I see you have a partner hanging around your neck there.
Yeah, the boss is in.
Yeah.
What is it?
It's a black cat with a
Oh, a kitty
tail.
cat. Our cat's given up on us. She just went away. Oh, pretty
there we
kitty.
Yeah.
Ours is asleep in a ball somewhere. She's a
Yeah.
Siamese.
She's decided we're talking about things that have nothing to do with reality.
Well,
Well, I'm actually heading to a convention tomorrow.
Oh, really?
What convention?
Windy City Pulp and Paper
Oh,
show
yeah.
in Chicago.
How about that? Yeah.
They're good.
We used to go to WindyCon all the time.
I've been there a few times, but But when the pulp and paper is great because they've got just row upon row upon row of ancient magazines, and
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
but will you be at Worldcon this year?
Yeah.
Planning on it.
Yeah.
Okay, well, I should be there.
Good.
Yep.
I'll be there too.
She knows where it is.
Seattle.
Seattle.
Yeah.
I knew it was up there somewhere.
And Nebulas are in Kansas City.
Yeah.
Oh, they are?
Huh?
Yeah.
I didn't know that. That's, I live in
Oh,
Seattle.
you
So that,
oh, Rich, did you not see the notice?
About Mark's Clarion classmate?
oh yeah, I
Nicola
saw
is the
that.
new Grandmaster.
Yeah, I posted about that.
Oh, yes, you did. Yes, well, it's Facebook. One has to be careful.
Yeah, that's one of
Is
them.
or is it Limericks? Yeah, but yeah, it's going to be Kansas City, and she called me the other day, or I called her to congratulate her, and before I know it, she's going, "Well, you are coming, aren't you?"
I've never been to Nebulas. Maybe I'll go because that's convenient.
They're different.
Yeah,
They're different.
and they're
Yeah.
expensive, horribly expensive.
Oh, my God.
Horribly
Yeah.
expensive. Yeah, I mean, I asked Donna, and she said, "Well, how much is it?" And I looked it up, and I told her, and she just kind of went,
Yeah.
Mm.
It includes the banquet. You can't do it.
"Well, that's one expensive dinner."
Yeah.
Yes, indeed.
And guess
Um,
what it is? Rubber chicken and peas.
We don't.
Yeah, but we kind of there's a certain symmetry to it because in '96 the Nebs were in Kansas City, and Nicola won for Slow River,
Oh,
but flew into St. Louis, and we chauffeured her to Kansas City, and so we were there for that. We need to be there for this.
You do.
yeah. Well,
You
good.
definitely. And we'll know somebody. The last time we went to a Nebulous, we didn't know hardly anybody.
Oh, it's getting
Oh.
it's kind of getting depressing. It's like, who are all these people?
Worldly people, right?
And they're all so young. But
Yep. How did that happen?
yeah,
Yeah, that's the other thing I noticed, that Nicola is only the second Grandmaster who's actually younger than me, and that's a sobering thought that the Grandmasters are now being younger than me.
Yeah,
Uh-oh.
there's something wrong about that. Yeah.
so yeah, it's going to be cool. I mean, the first time we didn't know she'd won the Nebula, and we're sitting at the table with her, and when Gene Wolfe read the announcement, there was this. Don't pass out! Don't pass out! You actually won the damn thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, we're kind of a little gobsmacked. Yeah, she was in my Clarion class.
No, right.
That's cool.
So she should take this Grandmaster and show it to that MSU professor who was so dismissive.
Oh, yeah, I think he's dead by now. I mean, he he looked like he was heading toward retirement at the time, but yeah, yeah, that was an amazing experience, and it's been a real trip. So yeah, we're going to bite the bullet and go. So I was glad to. Yeah, you'll know us. We'll be there.
We'll know you, and we'll know her.
And you'll know Nicola and Kelly and
Yep.
who I don't know who the hell else is going to be there. I really
No
don't.
idea. No idea.
So, but it's Kansas City, which is a cool city to visit anyway.
Yeah, it's a great place.
Robin Bailey.
Yeah, I went to the Worldcon there. It was great.
Yeah.
Oh.
Yeah. And I think it's the same hotel that the Worldcon was in, which is
Yeah.
nice
There was
part
a UFO themed burger place walking distance from the Con Hotel at Worldcon.
Yeah.
That's
Great.
well
Yeah.
worth taking the trek to visit.
Joe
'Cause
won his
it's
first Hugo,
lovely.
in Kansas City.
Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
75
that's right. That would have been the Kansas City one. Yeah.
at Worldcon.
And
76 Worldcon.
and my other literary angle, so Hemingway and Fitzgerald studies, converges at the Muhlenbach Hotel.
Oh.
Hemingway worked there at the Kansas City Star, and his bailiwick was included that hotel.
Speaking of Robin Bailey, I found his first published story, which was in a Sunday supplement for the Kansas City Star. I was
Really?
looking at it for some reason. He had a different name. I think his actual original first name is Robert.
Yeah.
And I read the story and I looked at the biographical details. I know him a little bit. And I just emailed him. I said, "This has to be one of your stories." And he goes, "Oh, well, it's my first story." No.
Wow, how about that?
Great.
But yeah. Speaking of Hemingway, the best writer in my high school class, I probably am second best, which is a bad enough denunciation of the talent in that class. But anyway, this guy, I grew up in the Chicago area, and he ended up moving into Hemingway's house, which was a
Really?
museum by that time, but they
Yeah.
rented out the attic
Right.
to aspiring writers, I guess, or something like that.
They
So the
still-
magic would somehow osmose into them.
Yeah,
Yeah.
they still do.
They still do that.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
Clark.
he has ended up publishing a number of novels and some pretty successful books. A book about Edith Wilson, of all people.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
So
Well, maybe there's something with,
Magic.
osmosis. Yeah.
Hemingway magic.
Yeah. Who knows? All right, folks, it's getting on 8:30.
Yeah.
And it's been a real pleasure. And it was a lot of fun revisiting the novel. This is the third time I've read The Forever War.
Wow.
Wow.
And
This
I
was
don't-
my second. I read it back in the 70s, and this is the first time since. So it was a good rediscovery.
it held up well. But especially after it got into the far future, it's like, well, who knows?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh,
Well, I've read it dozens of times myself, but always I was getting paid for it.
oh, well,
Copy editing and things
Yeah.
like that.
oh yeah. So thank you for being a really good writer and for being in the world.
Oh, sure.
Thank you
I've
for
got
yeah,
asking him
world,
to do
yeah.
this.
Yeah.
So
And for spending some time with us.
Oh, sure. Always glad to do that.
It was fun.
So we will see you. We'll see. Don and I will see you in Kansas City.
Terrific.
And you go ahead and take care.
Okay. Thank you.
You too, all of you.
Thank you. Be well.
Woody?
Bye.
Bye.